So in this video, we're going to be comparing the Canon 1DX Mark III to the Panasonic S1H. Now, like always, I'm not going to be talking about anything and everything between these two cameras. I'm just going to talk about the things that are important to me, and that's pretty much it. But if you have a question that I might know the answer of, go ahead and ask in the comments below, and I'm going to try my best to answer it for you. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to talk about is the screen between these two cameras. Now, if we're talking about the screen on the back of the camera, I'm going to have to give it to the Canon 1DX Mark III because it is brighter, it's easier to pull focus on the back of the screen, and to me, I can see it a lot better in daytime situations when there's a lot of sun out there. Broad daylight, I can see it better than the Panasonic S1H. However, if we talk about viewfinder, which both of them have now, we're not just comparing Pocket 6Ks and 4Ks, both of them actually has viewfinders. The Panasonic S1H viewfinder, I gotta say, is the best viewfinder I have ever seen on a camera. So when it comes to screen, I'm gonna have to give it to Canon 1DX Mark III, but when it comes to the viewfinder, the Panasonic S1H takes it home. All right, the next thing we're gonna talk about are inputs between these two cameras. Now, they're pretty similar as far as input goes. They have 3.5mm mic, headphone jack, and whatever, but to me, the only thing that separates the Canon 1DX Mark III from the Panasonic S1H is the full HDMI. I trust full HDMI a lot more than I trust smaller HDMI like the micro and mini. I have yet to break a full HDMI cable or port, but smaller HDMI cables and port I've broken in the past. So from past experience, I trust full HDMI over the smaller ones. So when it comes to inputs, I'm gonna have to give it to the Canon 1DX Mark III. So moving on to media options between these two cameras, the Canon 1DX Mark III uses C Express cards, which are, if we're going gigabyte per dollar, it is more expensive than the Panasonic S1H's SD cards. Now, if we're talking 170 megabytes a second SD card, you're looking at maybe $40 on the S1H. But at the same token, if you're looking at 128 gigabyte on the CFast Express, you're looking at around 200 bucks. Now, if you get a 300 megabyte on the SD card, obviously that's gonna be more expensive, but I was able to use the 170 megabytes a second on the test I was doing, so that's a lot cheaper than the newer 300 megabytes SD card. So when it comes to media options and media cost, I am gonna have to give it to the Panasonic S1H because it is cheaper, which brings us to the next topic of low light capability. I honestly was not expecting the results I got out of these cameras, so let's go ahead and dive into it. So I tested the Panasonic S1H with noise reduction on and off, and I can safely say that the Panasonic S1H low light capability with the noise reduction turned down all the way to -5 is a lot better than leaving them by default. So the Panasonic S1H can shoot up to 51,200 ISO in video mode. Now, I had it with the noise reduction on, so I wasn't too happy about the Panasonic S1H built-in noise reduction. I thought it just looked like trash, but when I toned down the noise reduction in camera on the Panasonic S1H and compared both of the cameras again, it was a lot better. So if we're talking about just how much you can see in the dark low light, I'm gonna have to give it to the Panasonic S1H. But for me, since I don't really shoot anything past 3,200, maybe 5,000 is probably the highest I've ever gone in a camera, and that was with a GH5S and the Pocket 6K and the Pocket 4K. So if we're talking about 5,000 ISO, I would go with the Canon 1DX Mark III because you do get that raw capability. It has a lot more bitrate than the S1H, but if you just want to know who can see the most in the dark, that is going to be the Panasonic S1H. So the next thing we're going to talk about are probably the most important things to me when it comes to a camera, and that's dynamic range, highlight recovery, and color science. So the Canon 1DX Mark III has better color science in my opinion. It's very easy to color correct and make the Canon 1DX Mark III look good when shooting RAW and using Log 2, Log 3, whatever you want in DaVinci Resolve. However, I thought the Canon 1DX Mark III would have more dynamic range, but unfortunately that is not the case. I did the highlight recovery with these cameras, and the Panasonic S1H shooting vlog actually recovered a lot more detail and highlights than the Canon 1DX Mark III. So that means that the Panasonic S1H has more dynamic range and has better highlight recovery than the Canon 1DX Mark III. Okay, so moving on with frame rates or slow motion, guys. Okay, so the Canon 1DX Mark III can shoot 60 frames per second RAW. Amazing for the camera. However, the Panasonic S1H can shoot 4K, 60p, and at HD, it can shoot up to 8-bit 180 frames per second. So this is, like I said in my previous video, this is really where you gotta ask yourself, what's more important? Slow motion, high frame rates, or quality? So for me, I only shoot 60 frames per second, majority of the time 48 frames per second, so I would take the Canon 1DX Mark III. But I know some people out there really need the high definition slow motion. If that's the case, go with the Panasonic S1H because you can shoot up to 180 frames per second, 8-bit. However, just know that any of the frame rates that you shoot in camera on the Panasonic S1H, you are gonna have a crop. It's gonna crop it to Super 35. You're not gonna get the full frame when shooting at any of the high frame rates on the Panasonic S1H. Even the 4K 60 frames per second is cropped. So just keep that in mind. Okay, so which brings us to the next topic of recording options. I kind of hinted at it a little bit. The Canon 1DX Mark III can shoot RAW, H.265, H.264. The Panasonic S1H can only shoot H.265, H.264, 10-bit, 8-bit. So with recording options, I'm gonna have to give it to the Canon 1DX Mark III because honestly, that's probably what you're paying the premium price for, is this camera being able to shoot video RAW. And in DaVinci Resolve, you can actually switch to Canon Log 2, and Canon Log 3 all in that software in a camera raw tab, which is so freaking versatile. Okay, next topic is gonna be battery life. This one is gonna be obvious. There's nothing out there that can beat the 1DX Mark III's battery. So when I was doing this test, I shot for 2 days, maybe I would say an hour between those 2 days, and when I looked at the battery indicators on both of these cameras, the 1DX Mark III barely took a hit. And you know, when I compare them, I do side-by-side recording simultaneously, so the Canon 1DX Mark III definitely wins battery life on this one. All right, so the next topic we're gonna talk about is stabilization. The Panasonic S1H surprisingly has better image stabilization, the Canon 1DX Mark III. It was actually pretty darn impressive. I had the camera, I walked with it, just hand holding both of them, and the Panasonic S1H just was able to stabilize the footage a lot more. And then the Canon 1DX Mark III really has that distortion. You can kind of see it. It's kind of stabilized itself like you would if you would apply a stabilizer in After Effects. It just has that warping is the right word. So when it comes to stabilizing, the Panasonic S1H wins. Which takes us to the next topic of autofocus. Holy crap, I did like 4 or 5 autofocus tests on both of these cameras, and there's just no way. The Panasonic S1H just can't touch the autofocus, continuous autofocus capability of the Canon 1DX Mark III. I'm gonna say it again, so far, the Canon 1DX Mark III probably has the best continuous autofocus in a DSLR camera, period. And you all know I hated autofocus before, but the Canon 1DX Mark III really changed my perspective when it comes to autofocus. All right, so the next topic we're gonna talk about, and I promise I'm almost done, we're gonna talk about stills capabilities between these two cameras. The Canon 1DX Mark III is a 20 megapixel camera. The Panasonic S1H is 24 megapixel. Obviously, I'm gonna have to go with more megapixels, and I'm not just saying that because more is better. The quality coming out of the Panasonic S1H is actually better than the Canon 1DX Mark III. And trust me, I'm not a Panasonic fanboy. I have shot Canon majority of the time. I've shot stills, and I love the Canon color science, but the Panasonic S1H just takes better pictures than the Canon 1DX Mark III. Which brings us to the last category of price, dinero, cha-ching. The Panasonic S1H you can have for $4,000 body only. The Canon 1DX Mark III you can have for $6,400 body only, but it does have a built-in bigger battery at the bottom, which I actually would say a battery grip. So in a way, yeah. So that being said, as far as price goes, I'm always gonna go with cheaper is better. And comparing these cameras, I would say I would still go with the Panasonic S1H. It's just the smartest move at this moment. At $4,000 body only, you can have, 4K shooting, 24 megapixels, stills camera. So price point, I'm gonna have to give to the Panasonic S1H. Okay, so let's talk about the verdict to wrap it up. Who won this comparison? I'm gonna have to give it to the Panasonic S1H, just because really the only thing separating the Panasonic S1H to the 1DX Mark III is the RAW capability and autofocus capability. If I don't really care that much about autofocus, really the only thing stopping me from buying an S1H instead of a 1DX is the raw built-in capability of the 1DX Mark III. But I know there's a lot of craziness going on in the world today. Atomos is supposed to be coming out with a ProRes RAW on the Panasonic S1H. So let's do the math here. I'm not smart, but I think I can do this. $4,000 plus 400, because you can actually get a bundle right now for a Panasonic S1H that comes with an Atomos recorder for $4,400 that in the future can record ProRes RAW. I think that's worth it. For $4,400, Atomos recorder, Panasonic S1H versus a 1DX Mark III. If you do that comparison, then really all you're missing out on the Panasonic S1H is the amazing autofocus. So at that point, in my opinion, the Panasonic S1H is still a better buy than buying the Canon 1DX Mark III. All right guys, so that is all I have for you guys today. Thank you all for all the comments. It actually helps me out a lot. I know a lot of people take that kind of negatively. Honestly, for me, I used to do that, but the comments that you guys give actually help me out. It helps me tweak it out, and it helps me tweak the content a little bit. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, let me know, and I will see you guys later.